I was pulling the last of the summer squash from my garden when my phone rang. It was a Tuesday morning in late September, the kind where the air still feels warm but you can smell autumn underneath it, that earthy sweetness that always reminds me of my mother's kitchen. I had my gloves on, dirt under my nails, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I didn't. Mom. My son's voice was wrong immediately. Not the wrong of a bad day or a frustrating commute, the wrong of something broken. Mom, I need you to come. It's Lydia. I dropped the squash. I didn't even notice. My daughter-in-law Lydia had been 7 months pregnant with their second child. My son Adrian and I had always been close. He was the kind of boy who called on Sundays without being reminded, who still asked for my pot roast recipe, even though I'd written it out for him 3 times. When he brought Lydia home 6 years ago, I loved her before dinner was even over. She was quiet in that careful way, the kind of quiet that means someone has been listening their whole life. She had a laugh that surprised you, sudden and full, like she forgot herself and didn't care. Her family was from South Carolina, a small town outside Columbia. Her grandmother had raised her. Her parents had passed young. She had no siblings. When she married my son, I told her, "You are not marrying into a family. You are gaining one." I meant it then. I mean it now. What I did not know, what I was not paying attention to, was that my former daughter-in-law, my son's first wife, Pamela, had never stopped being welcome at my son's father-in-law's house. My ex-husband Gerald's people, his sister Vivian and her husband, had taken a deep and particular dislike to Lydia from the moment Adrian brought her home. I noticed the cool handshakes. I noticed the way Vivian's husband, Otto, barely looked at her during holiday dinners. I told myself it was just how they were. Some people take longer to warm up. I made excuses the way you do when you don't want to see something clearly. Adrian's father-in-law, Lydia's father-in-law, the man my son called Dad for the 7 years after my divorce, was a man named Harlan, retired from the county assessor's office, lived 40 minutes away in a brick ranch house with a flagpole in the front yard. Harlan had always struck me as a quiet man, opinionated but quiet about it, the kind who says very little and means all of it. He was the one, I would later learn, who said it. I got to the hospital in 45 minutes. I should not have been driving that fast, but I was. My son was in the waiting area, still in his work clothes. He was a contractor, always had sawdust somewhere. And when he saw me, he stood up, and I could see that he had been crying and had stopped and was trying very hard not to start again. I went to him. I held his face in my hands like I used to when he was small. "Tell me," I said. Lydia had been at a family lunch, Harlan's house. It was supposed to be a casual thing. His sister was visiting from out of state. They wanted to see Lydia and the baby before things got busy. My son couldn't make it. A job ran long. Lydia went alone because Lydia was the kind of person who showed up. At some point during the afternoon, Lydia had excused herself to get some air on the back porch. She had been feeling lightheaded. She'd mentioned it to the nurse at her last appointment, and they said it was normal, the heat, the 3rd trimester. She stepped outside. She didn't come back in. One of Harlan's neighbors found her 2 hours later, collapsed in the drainage ditch at the back edge of the property, her ankle twisted, her head bleeding from where she'd hit the edge of the concrete culvert. Her phone was gone. She had walked, or been walked, further than made any sense for a woman who just needed air. She was hypothermic by the time the paramedics arrived. The baby's heartbeat was faint. My son looked at me in that waiting room and he said, "Dad called me on the way over." He said, he stopped. He pressed his lips together. "What did he say, Adrian?" He said that Lydia had been careless, that she'd been warned about going near the edge of the property, that sometimes things happen when people don't listen. He exhaled slowly, and then he said, "Mom, He said that he hoped this would make us reconsider some things about our life, about who we'd surrounded ourselves with. He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. I knew what that meant. I had spent 63 years in this world. I knew exactly what that meant. Lydia is black. My son is white. Their daughter, who was 3 years old and at my house with my neighbor watching cartoons, has her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin and is the most beautiful child I have ever seen in my life. And I am not saying that because she is my granddaughter. I am saying it because it is true. Harlan had made his feelings known in small ways over the years. A comment about keeping things simple. A pointed question about whether Adrian had thought this through. A silence at the baby shower that was worse than any words. But I had told myself, I will not make that mistake again. The doctors came out after another hour. The baby was stable. Lydia was stable. Her ankle was fractured, 2 ribs bruised, and there was a laceration on her temple that had required 11 stitches. She had not been unconscious long enough to have serious head trauma, they said, but they were monitoring for swelling. The baby, a boy, they had not yet announced the name. They were saving it, was showing healthy movement. They wanted to keep her for at least 3 days. When I was finally allowed into her room, she looked small in that bed. Lydia is not a small woman. She is solid and warm, and when she hugs you, it means something. But under those lights, with the monitors and the IV and the way she was holding herself still, she looked like something that had been handled wrong. She looked at me when I came in, and her eyes filled up, and she said, I don't know what happened. I don't know how I got all the way out there. I sat beside her and held her hand and said nothing about Harlan. Not yet. She told me she remembered feeling dizzy. She remembered going to the porch. She thought she heard something, a sound from the far corner of the yard, near the old fence. She walked toward it, and then she was on the ground and her head was ringing and it was dark. Was anyone else on the porch? I asked. She closed her eyes. Harlan came out, she said quietly. He said he wanted to check on me. He brought me some water. I drank it, and then I don't remember much. I kept my face still. I am very good at keeping my face still. Years of teaching junior high will do that for you. I called my brother that night from the hospital parking garage. His name is Eugene. He is 4 years older than me, retired from 22 years in law enforcement before he went into private security consulting, and he is the most methodical person I have ever known. He does not panic. He does not exaggerate. When something is wrong, he wants to know exactly how wrong, and then he figures out what to do about it. I told him everything. The lunch. The porch. The water. What Harlan had said to my son on the phone. Eugene was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, she drank something he brought her. Yes. And then she doesn't remember how she got to the ditch. Correct. Mara, he said. That is what he calls me. He has called me that since we were children. I need you to talk to the attending physician tonight. Tell them what you told me. Tell them to run a tox screen if they haven't already. I had not even thought of that. I am not proud of that, but I had been in shock, the same as my son, the same as everyone else. I went back inside. The toxicology report came back 41 hours later. Promethazine, a prescription antihistamine that causes severe drowsiness, sometimes disorientation, sometimes in high doses, especially in heat, especially in a pregnant woman, a dangerous drop in blood pressure. It is the kind of thing that, if you dissolved it in a glass of water, would be undetectable by taste. It is the kind of thing that would make a pregnant woman on a warm afternoon stumble, lose her footing, go down hard in a drainage ditch, and not fully understand what had happened to her. The attending physician called the police. Here is what I have to tell you about the hours between learning what was in Lydia's system and the moment Harlan was brought in for questioning. I did not sleep. I sat in the family waiting area with my son, and I drank bad coffee, and I held his hand, and I listened to him blame himself over and over. He should have been there. He should have noticed sooner. He should never have let her go alone. And I told him the truth, which was there was nothing he could have done. This was planned. This was deliberate. The only person responsible for what happened to Lydia was Harlan. My son is a grown man. He is 38 years old. But that night he cried the way he cried when he was 7, when our old dog got hit on the road out front, when the grief was too big for his body and he couldn't help it. I held him, and I thought about Harlan in his brick ranch house with his flagpole and his opinions and his quiet cruelty, and I felt something settle into place inside me, cold and clear, like the moment after a very long storm. Eugene drove up the next morning, 6 hours from where he lives outside Roanoke. He came straight to the hospital, sat with Adrian while I took a walk, and when I came back he was calm and practical, and had already made 2 phone calls. One was to a family law attorney he knew in the city. The other was to a former colleague, now a detective at the county sheriff's department. "You let me handle the logistics," he said to me quietly in the hallway. "You stay with your son." That is what Eugene does. He handles the logistics. What came out over the following 2 weeks was this. Harlan had not acted alone. His sister, who had been visiting from out of state, a woman I had met exactly twice at family gatherings and dismissed as simply unfriendly, had been the one to acquire the medication. She had a prescription for it herself, had filled it at a pharmacy 2 states over 3 weeks before the lunch. Investigators found the receipt. Vivian, my ex-husband's sister, had been in contact with Harlan for months. Her husband Otto had been in the group text. What they had planned, specifically, I don't know that I will ever understand fully. Whether they expected Lydia to lose the baby, whether they expected worse, whether they told themselves they were simply trying to cause a scare, to make my son and Lydia reconsider their life together. None of those things make it better. I stopped trying to understand the thinking of people who see a pregnant woman and feel nothing but resentment about whose child she's carrying. Pamela. My son's first wife, the woman Vivian and Otto had never stopped welcoming, had not been involved. I believe that. She had her own life. She had moved on. She did not know what was being done in what I assume was some warped loyalty to her and to an idea of what my son's life should look like. The charges that were filed, Harlan, felony assault with bodily harm and criminal administration of a noxious substance. His sister, conspiracy to commit assault and obtaining a controlled substance under false pretenses. Otto was investigated and ultimately not charged. There was not enough to hold him on, Eugene told me, though the civil case would be different. The civil case is still ongoing. I am not at liberty to say more than that. Lydia's son was born on November 14th. He was 6 pounds, 9 ounces, and he cried immediately and loudly, which the nurse said was a very good sign, and which made my son laugh and cry at the same time in a way I had never seen before and hoped to see many more times. They named him after Lydia's grandfather, a man I never got to meet, but have come to know through the stories she tells. A man who grew up in rural South Carolina in the 1940s, who built things with his hands, who raised a family on very little and dignity on a great deal. A man who taught Lydia that your worth is not something that can be assigned by someone else's opinion of your bloodline. I thought about that in the delivery room. I am 63 years old. I have outlived 1 husband and 1 marriage and more opinions than I can count about what I should have done differently. I have raised a son who loves a woman fully and without conditions. I have a granddaughter who is 3 and already bossy in the best possible way. I have a new grandson named for a man who deserved to be remembered. And I have my brother, who drove 6 hours without being asked, who knew exactly who to call, who sat in hospital hallways with my son so that I could fall apart privately and then come back steady. There is something I want to say, and I want to say it carefully. What happened to Lydia was a crime, and it is being treated as one. But the part that keeps me up sometimes, not often, not the way it used to, is the part that happened before any of that. The years of small signals I explained away. The dinners where she sat at the end of the table and I noticed but said nothing. The comment Harlan made at Thanksgiving 3 years ago about keeping the family line clear that I told myself I had misheard because I didn't want to have that conversation. I did not protect her the way I should have. I want to say that plainly. I was more concerned with keeping the peace at my son's family events than with standing up clearly for the woman my son had chosen to build his life with. I cannot go back and fix that. What I can do, what I did, was be present for everything that came after. Lydia knows this. We have talked about it. She is more generous than I deserve, honestly. She said you showed up when it counted. That's what matters. I told her I intended to keep showing up. She said she was counting on it. In February, 6 months after that September morning in my garden, I went back out to the same patch and started turning the soil for spring planting. My granddaughter was with me, in her little boots, very serious about the role she had decided she was playing in the process, which mostly involved reorganizing the seed packets and asking questions I couldn't always answer. My phone rang. Eugene. The judge accepted the plea on Harlan's case. He said, 7 years. He'll serve a minimum of 4, probably more given his age and health. I sat back on my heels. My granddaughter was watching me with those big eyes, the ones that see everything. Okay, I said. You all right? I'm all right, I said. And I meant it. Not the way you say it when you want someone to stop worrying, the way you say it when something that has been wrong for a long time is finally, slowly, beginning to come right. I thanked him. I told him I'd call him Sunday. I hung up. My granddaughter handed me a packet of tomato seeds, very earnest, and said, Grandma, this one goes first. Does it? I said. Yes, she said. I decided. I laughed, the kind that surprises you sudden and full, like forgetting yourself and not caring at all. Lydia's laugh, the one I loved before dinner was even over. All right, baby, I said, you're in charge. I pressed the first seed into the dirt, and we got to work. I have thought a lot about cause and effect since that September. Not in any grand philosophical way, just the plain practical truth of it. The things we allow have consequences. The things we ignore grow. That is not a belief system. That is just how life works, and I had to be honest with myself about my part in it. Harlan did not become the man who dissolved medication into a glass of water overnight. He became that man slowly, over years, in a house where his opinions went unchallenged and his cruelty was excused as personality. I sat at his table. I let the comments pass. I told myself it wasn't my place, that Adrian and Lydia could handle their own family dynamics, that making a scene would only make things harder for everyone. What I was actually doing was protecting my own comfort at the expense of a woman who had done nothing wrong except love my son and carry his children. That is the part that required the most honesty to look at directly. Intelligence without courage is just information you never use. I knew, on some level, what Harlan was. I had enough information. What I lacked was the willingness to act on it before something terrible forced my hand. My brother Eugene did not have that problem. When I called him from that parking garage, he did not waste a single moment on shock or disbelief. He asked the right questions immediately. He knew who to call. He moved. That is what wisdom actually looks like in practice. Not the ability to say the right things afterward, but the clarity to act correctly in the moment when it is difficult and uncertain, and the outcome is not guaranteed. Lydia showed me something else entirely. She is a woman who lost her parents young, raised largely by a grandfather who taught her that dignity is something you carry, not something you're granted. When she lay in that hospital bed with 11 stitches in her temple and a fractured ankle and a baby still fighting to hold on, she did not collapse into bitterness. She was frightened and she was in pain, and she was honest about both of those things. But she was not broken. That kind of resilience does not come from never being hurt. It comes from having been taught by someone who loved you that your worth is not up for a vote. Her grandfather taught her that. Mine taught Eugene and me something similar, in different words, that you show up, you do what is right, and you do not stop. I had let that lesson drift somewhere in the middle years, when life got quieter and it felt easier to smooth things over. Adrian's son, named for the man who raised Lydia, will grow up knowing that story. So will my granddaughter, when she is old enough to understand it. What I know now, at 63, having sat in too many hospital waiting rooms and signed too many legal documents and held my son while he cried in a way I hadn't seen since he was small. What I know is this: the people who mean to cause harm almost always rely on the silence of people who know better. They count on it. They have counted on it for years. The moment you stop being silent, their whole architecture starts to come apart. Harlan is serving his sentence. His sister faced her consequences. And in my kitchen last Sunday, Lydia sat at my table with both of her children, and we made pie from scratch the way my mother taught me, and we talked about nothing important, and it was the best afternoon I've had in years. That is what the other side of a hard thing looks like. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just ordinary life reclaimed.